A soldier returned home after months deployed overseas, expecting a peaceful reunion but instead finding himself stepping into a rain-soaked funeral. The solemn face in the memorial portrait was painfully familiar, his beloved wife, but the hurried circumstances and details surrounding her passing felt disturbingly foreign. Draped solemnly in the American flag, the coffin rested silently upon a raised platform, a grieving German shepherd named Ranger laying quietly atop it, injured and weary, his amber eyes glistening with sorrow. A fierce gust of wind blew suddenly, lifting the corner of the flag and revealing unsettling scratches on the coffin lid, signs of recent tampering. From that moment, the line between death and life blurred, sparking a journey toward a buried truth. Nearby, Grace, the soldier's determined sister-in-law, stood clutching anonymous emails and cryptic recordings hinting at deception and betrayal. The afternoon sky darkened as Ranger howled urgently, signaling that beneath the surface of grief lay secrets desperate to be uncovered. The sky hung low over Clearfield, Montana, an endless stretch of gray that poured down sheets of cold rain, soaking the sleepy town in sorrowful silence. The streets were slick, the pavement shining dimly under the faint glow of streetlights. It was late November, and the bitter wind promised winter was already knocking at the doorstep. The town, usually filled with the calm bustle of everyday life, now seemed quiet and subdued, weighed down by the tragic loss of one of its own. At Clearfield Memorial Cemetery, a modest crowd gathered around a freshly dug grave, heads bowed, shoulders slumped, their figures blurred in the drizzle. At the center lay a simple wooden coffin, draped solemnly in an American flag. Beside it stood a photograph of Eleanor Callahan, smiling softly from behind a thin frame of silver. She had a gentle face, framed by wavy chestnut hair. Even in the photograph, her warm hazel eyes radiated a kindness that spoke louder than words ever could. Near the coffin, a German shepherd named Ranger lay quietly. Ranger was a retired canine with sable fur now peppered with gray, showing the signs of both age and the hardships he'd endured. Once a powerful and fierce animal, his muscular frame was now leaner, marked by a pronounced limp from an injury that had ended his active duty prematurely. Despite the rain drenching his coat, he didn't move, eyes fixed sorrowfully on the coffin. Those amber eyes, once alert and sharp, now seemed glazed with unshed tears, giving the mourners a heart-wrenching image of unwavering loyalty and profound grief. Standing slightly apart from the crowd was Grace Miller, Eleanor's younger sister. Grace was slender, with a quiet, thoughtful demeanor. Her fiery red hair, dampened by rain, clung to her pale face, emphasizing her striking blue eyes. Those eyes, usually filled with determination and curiosity from her work as a local investigative journalist, now flickered uneasily. She clutched a small notebook tightly in her trembling fingers, a habit born from years of documenting suspicious leads and curious tales. But today, something troubled her far deeper than she dared admit. The funeral arrangements had come too swiftly, and too many details in Eleanor's death report didn't add up. Eleanor, her vibrant, meticulous sister, had been declared dead far too hastily for Grace's comfort. A quiet rustling at the cemetery gates made heads turn. James Callahan had arrived. Tall, broad-shouldered, his figure seemed to fill the entire cemetery entrance. His face, strong and rugged with faint scars marking battles fought overseas, bore the exhaustion of a soldier returned from deployment in Eastern Europe. His sandy brown hair, normally neatly groomed, was now disheveled beneath his military cap, and his deep brown eyes held a pain that words could not express. James moved forward, heavy boots crunching softly over gravel and wet leaves. Every step closer to Eleanor's coffin seemed to drain him further, weakening his already fragile composure. Seeing Ranger laying so mournfully by the coffin, James felt his chest tighten. He and Ranger had spent years side by side, forming a bond that surpassed the typical partnership between handler and canine. Ranger had been instrumental in saving countless lives, including James' own, during a firefight 2 years prior. But now, the dog's sorrow mirrored his own, amplifying a deepening suspicion gnawing at James's heart. Something wasn't right. He knelt beside Ranger, gently stroking the dog's damp fur. "Good boy," James murmured hoarsely, voice choked with emotion. Ranger glanced briefly at James, whining softly, then resumed nudging gently against the coffin. James frowned. Ranger was highly trained, capable of sensing danger, explosives, and even human life through layers of rubble. Could the dog possibly sense something he himself couldn't? Across from them, Grace stepped closer, notebook still clutched nervously. "James," she began hesitantly, her voice nearly lost in the drizzling rain. "Something feels off here. The funeral. Eleanor's accident." She swallowed hard. "It all happened too quickly." James met her gaze steadily, gratitude briefly softening his hardened expression. "You noticed, too," he murmured. "But the military insists everything is in order." Grace shook her head, a spark of defiance returning to her eyes. "I have contacts at Ridgefield Hospital, where Eleanor volunteered. They're uneasy. Someone is hiding something." Before James could respond, an elderly priest stepped forward. Father Martin, short and slightly stooped, with thinning white hair plastered to his scalp from the rain, motioned quietly for silence. "We gather today," he began solemnly, voice gentle but carrying clear authority, "to say farewell to Eleanor Callahan, beloved wife, sister, friend, and healer to many." As the priest spoke, Ranger's whining grew louder, almost urgent. James's heartbeat quickened. He'd seen Ranger act like this only once before on the battlefield, when he had detected someone alive beneath the rubble. James stared at the coffin, realization slowly dawning in his eyes, dread swirling in his chest. "No," he muttered suddenly, standing abruptly. The crowd turned toward him in surprise. Father Martin paused mid-prayer, eyebrows knitting in concern. Grace stepped nearer, alarmed. "James, what's wrong?" James shook his head vehemently, voice rising. "Ranger senses something. He never makes mistakes. Eleanor might still be—" From the edge of the crowd, a tall, composed figure stepped forward sharply. Colonel Robert Pierce, James's superior officer, in uniform immaculate despite the rain, his silver-streaked black hair neatly combed, moved calmly but firmly. "James, grief can cause delusions. We have confirmed—" James cut him off abruptly. "With all due respect, sir, Ranger has never been wrong. Please." Colonel Pierce hesitated, a faint glimmer of sympathy battling the sternness of his military discipline. Around them, whispers of confusion and shock rippled through the mourners. Grace stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on James's arm. "Please, Colonel, it won't hurt to check." Pierce exhaled, signaling reluctantly to two attendants nearby. "Lift the flag carefully. Be respectful." The flag was slowly removed, revealing the polished oak surface beneath. Ranger barked sharply, startling everyone, as James knelt again, heart pounding furiously in his ears. The dog's persistent scratching at the coffin was now frantic. James placed his ear against the wood, listening desperately for any sign of life, any whisper of hope beneath the crushing silence. Nothing. Yet Ranger continued, relentless, eyes wild, paws scratching feverishly. James looked up, anguished. "We must open it," he pleaded desperately. Colonel Pierce shook his head solemnly. "James, I cannot allow that without—" But Ranger barked again, so urgent, so desperate, it echoed painfully through the cemetery, mingling with the sobbing rain. The mourners watched, frozen, as James, driven by instinct and desperation, grabbed a nearby crowbar lying beside the digging equipment. "I'm sorry," he whispered fiercely, thrusting the bar beneath the coffin's lid, heart breaking with every splinter of wood. The lid loosened slightly, and with one last thrust, it cracked open. Silence fell, heavy and absolute. Ranger, now panting heavily, nudged the lid aside with his snout. James leaned forward, heart in his throat. Inside, Eleanor lay pale and utterly still, yet something seemed off. Her skin lacked the lifeless pallor of the dead, and faint warmth lingered near her fingertips. Ranger placed his muzzle gently against Eleanor's neck, whining softly, tail wagging faintly for the first time. "She's alive!" James gasped in disbelief, eyes wild, meeting Grace's horrified yet hopeful stare. A collective gasp erupted, Colonel Pierce's usually composed face twisted with shock. Grace covered her mouth, trembling violently. But James felt nothing but fierce resolve as he lifted Eleanor tenderly from the coffin into his arms, rain now washing away tears and doubts alike. James Callahan drove slowly along the winding country road that led toward Ridgefield Hospital, his eyes heavy, his heart burdened by confusion and frustration. The late afternoon sun fought its way through scattered clouds, casting long, uneasy shadows across the worn asphalt. Beside him, Ranger sat quietly, his aging body shifting gently with each turn of the old pickup truck. Ranger's amber eyes, sharp again after the earlier turmoil, scanned the passing landscape, vigilant as ever, despite his injuries and age. James couldn't help but admire the steadfast devotion the dog still showed. Ranger seemed fully aware that their mission was far from over. Ridgefield Hospital was perched atop a low hill on the outskirts of town, its whitewashed exterior now faded to a dull gray. Once a respected institution, recent financial struggles had left many parts abandoned and in disrepair. James parked his truck in the deserted visitors' lot, eyeing the cracked pavement and rusting signposts. He paused for a moment, hesitating. Entering this place meant stepping deeper into a tangled mystery. Inside, the hospital's lobby felt cold and impersonal, lit weakly by flickering fluorescent bulbs. An elderly receptionist sat hunched over a worn mahogany desk. She wore a knitted shawl wrapped around her thin shoulders, her gray hair pulled tightly into a neat bun. Her nameplate read, Mary. As James approached, she adjusted her thick glasses, giving him a wary but curious look. "Excuse me," James began carefully. "I'm James Callahan. My wife Eleanor worked here as a volunteer doctor. I need to see some records." Mary's lips tightened, sympathy briefly visible behind her cautious stare. "Mr. Callahan, I'm afraid all files regarding Eleanor have been handed over to the authorities. We've been instructed not to release anything." Frustration welled within him, but James nodded quietly, murmuring his thanks before retreating. As he turned away, Ranger suddenly barked, pulling sharply on his leash. James, startled by the dog's sudden urgency, allowed Ranger to guide him down a shadowy corridor. The air grew colder and heavier, tinged with the faint metallic scent of antiseptics and something else musty and unsettling. They passed faded posters and empty patient rooms before Ranger halted in front of a rusted steel door marked Basement, Authorized Personnel Only. James hesitated only briefly, glancing around before pushing the heavy door open. Stale air rushed to meet them, darkness swallowing them whole. His heart pounded heavily as he stepped cautiously downward, his boots echoing against the concrete steps. Ranger pressed ahead, alert and determined, pausing occasionally to sniff the air, growling softly. They reached a corridor dimly illuminated by a single flickering bulb. Ranger stopped abruptly, whining as he sniffed a spot on the floor. James knelt down, noticing dark stains splattered across the concrete dried blood. Beside it, a torn piece of a blue surgical glove lay discarded, along with scattered glass fragments from what appeared to be a broken camera. James's stomach churned, suspicion tightening its grip on him. He pulled out his phone to photograph the evidence, knowing instinctively that Eleanor had met violence in this hidden place, far from the safety of the daylight world. Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the stairwell behind them. James turned sharply to find a young security guard approaching, flashlight in hand. Tall and wiry, no older than 25, his face paled at the sight of James and Ranger. "What are you doing here, sir?" he demanded nervously, flashlight shaking slightly. James rose slowly, showing empty hands to reassure the frightened guard. "I'm James Callahan. My wife was Eleanor Callahan. She volunteered here. I believe something happened to her in this basement." The young guard swallowed hard, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Mr. Callahan, you shouldn't be down here. They said you might come. I've been told to escort you out and report immediately if you showed up." "Who gave those orders?" James asked sharply, stepping closer. The guard hesitated, fear flashing in his brown eyes. "Hospital administration. I'm sorry, please leave or they'll press charges. They were very clear." Defeated yet determined, James nodded reluctantly, placing a comforting hand on Ranger's tense back. He turned back toward the stairs, knowing that this mystery had layers deeper and darker than he had anticipated. Meanwhile, back in Clearfield, Grace sat alone at her small desk in the corner of her apartment, the glow of her laptop illuminating her worried face. Her inbox pinged suddenly, startling her. She opened the email cautiously. It had no subject, no sender, only grainy images attached. Her heart skipped violently as she clicked through them. They showed Eleanor at Ridgefield Hospital, unmistakably alive, clearly time-stamped hours after her reported death. Grace felt a chill rush through her, panic mixing with anger. She couldn't ignore the implications. Someone was covering up the truth. Eleanor had stumbled onto something dangerous, and now Grace was receiving these anonymous warnings. Her journalism instincts ignited, pushing away fear, demanding action. She quickly scribbled notes, gathering her thoughts and preparing for a deeper dive into Ridgefield's past. At that moment, her phone buzzed. Grace answered hesitantly. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was distorted, barely a whisper. "Grace Miller, you don't know me, but I know what happened to Eleanor. She found something big people got hurt. Be careful who you trust." Before Grace could respond, the line went dead. Her heart thudded painfully, realization dawning someone had risked a great deal to reach out. Eleanor's death, or attempted murder, was not random. It was a silencing. Back in the hospital parking lot, James stared numbly at the sealed basement door from his truck. Ranger lay quietly beside him, exhausted, yet unwavering. James knew he couldn't give up. He dialed Grace's number, needing her insight now more than ever. "James," Grace answered breathlessly, "I've been trying to call you. I got these strange emails, photos of Eleanor after her reported death. Someone is trying to help us." James exhaled heavily, relieved but deeply troubled. "I found blood and signs of a struggle in the basement here, Grace. They forced me out, threatened legal action. Someone is desperately hiding the truth." "We can't back down," Grace whispered firmly, strength radiating even through the phone. "We owe Eleanor justice." James looked at Ranger, whose loyal eyes met his own with silent agreement. The path ahead was dark and fraught with peril, but James knew retreat was impossible. That night, the moon hung low, partially hidden behind drifting clouds as James sat awake, Ranger sleeping restlessly by his side. Eleanor's gentle smile haunted his thoughts, pushing him to promise silently that he would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Justice demanded answers, and James Callahan was ready to risk everything to find them. The next morning dawned cold and gray, the skies over Clearfield heavy with low clouds. A chilling wind blew steadily from the north, causing flags across the town to snap violently at half-mast. James Callahan stood at the crest of Flag Hill Cemetery, his tall figure braced against the wind as he gazed silently at Eleanor's freshly resealed grave. He had hardly slept the previous night, haunted by memories and questions, each darker than the last. At his side stood Ranger, the loyal German shepherd's sable coat tousled by the gusty wind, his eyes scanning the surrounding gravestones with an alertness James found oddly comforting. James knelt slowly, placing a hand on the headstone bearing Eleanor's name. Before he could even finish whispering his promise of justice, Ranger lifted his muzzle skyward, letting out a piercing, sorrowful howl. The sound echoed eerily across the cemetery, resonating deeply in James's chest, reigniting the anxiety he'd struggled to suppress. Ranger's agitation grew, his powerful frame stiffened, ears erect, eyes intensely focused on the grave. James followed Ranger's gaze, noticing with sudden alarm that one corner of the folded American flag covering Eleanor's coffin protruded slightly, flapping in the relentless wind. He frowned, stepping closer to inspect the discrepancy. As his fingers brushed the fabric, his pulse quickened beneath the displaced cloth. Clear scratches marked the edge of the coffin lid, signs it had recently been tampered with. James felt a surge of anger mixed with apprehension. He needed answers immediately. He stormed down the slope toward the cemetery's administrative office, Ranger trotting close at his heels. Inside the small building sat the caretaker, Frank Alderson, a short, stout man in his early 60s, with grizzled silver hair and a permanent scowl beneath thick eyebrows. Frank had lived his whole life in Clearfield, his brusque personality shaped by a career spent around grieving families. "Frank," James began, voice sharp with urgency, "someone's tried to open Eleanor's coffin. I need authorization to exhume the grave." Frank shook his head stubbornly, arms crossed. "Can't do it, James. Orders from the county sheriff. No more disturbances allowed. They said you caused enough of a scene yesterday." James felt his fists clench, frustration boiling over. "Frank, someone's covering up what happened to my wife. Can't you see? Eleanor deserves better." Frank's expression softened briefly, a flicker of genuine sympathy crossing his worn features, but his resolve hardened again. "I'm sorry. You need to get official approval. My hands are tied." James stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Ranger barked sharply, pulling James's attention back toward Eleanor's grave. Turning, he saw Grace hurrying up the path toward him, her flaming red hair whipping around her pale, anxious face. Clutched tightly in her hand was a small, digital recorder. Grace had barely slept either, her night spent deciphering cryptic messages from her anonymous informant. "James, wait," she panted, breath visible in the cold air. "You need to hear this." James took the recorder from her, pressing play as Ranger watched them closely. The sound of Eleanor's voice came through faintly, filled with fear and urgency. "They know," she whispered hurriedly, clearly terrified. "They found out I discovered their anesthetic drug embezzlement. I think they're planning something horrible. Grace, James, please, help." The recording abruptly ended. James stared at the device in disbelief, heart hammering painfully. Grace reached out, gripping his arm tightly. "Someone at the hospital sent this anonymously. Eleanor found out something she wasn't supposed to. They staged the accident, James." A sudden, fierce determination replaced James's shock. He knew now Eleanor had been targeted because of her discovery. Ranger began barking again, aggressively this time, dashing back toward the grave. James and Grace hurried after him, finding Ranger circling the headstone, fur bristling, snarling protectively. Standing several yards away was an unfamiliar figure, a woman in her late 30s, watching them intently. James approached cautiously, eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" She stepped forward hesitantly, glancing nervously around the cemetery. Petite, with delicate features framed by sleek dark blonde hair, her appearance sharply contrasted the heavy winter coat enveloping her slender frame. Her eyes, blue and restless, reflected anxiety as she spoke softly. "I'm Rebecca Cole. I worked alongside Eleanor at Ridgefield. I know what's been happening. I need your help as much as you need mine." James studied Rebecca carefully, wary yet intrigued. "Why should I trust you?" Rebecca's gaze dropped momentarily before lifting with quiet resolve. "Because I overheard them planning Eleanor's accident. I'm the one who sent the recording. I risked everything by doing so." Grace stepped forward sharply, curiosity outweighing caution. "Who exactly is them?" Rebecca hesitated, visibly shaken. "Dr. Anthony Morgan and Hospital Administrator Candace Harper. Eleanor uncovered how they'd been diverting anesthesia supplies selling drugs illegally. When she threatened exposure, they silenced her." James nodded slowly, processing the revelation. "Can you help us prove it?" Rebecca exhaled shakily. "I have some documents, hidden, but they know I'm suspicious. I'm afraid to go home alone." Grace placed a comforting hand on Rebecca's shoulder. "Come with us. You're safe now." Rebecca nodded gratefully, glancing toward the coffin with genuine sadness. She was brave, Eleanor. She saved lives, and they betrayed her. Ranger suddenly lunged toward the coffin again, barking fiercely, pawing insistently at the ground. James knelt, heart racing, noticing now fresh footprints in the mud nearby, leading toward the woods behind the cemetery. He stood sharply, instinctively alert. "Someone's watching us." Grace tensed, scanning the shadows nervously. Rebecca trembled visibly. Ranger lowered into a protective stance, teeth bared toward the tree line, a deep growl rumbling in his chest. From the woods stepped a man in a dark jacket, hood drawn up, obscuring his face. He halted momentarily, staring at them, then turned and quickly disappeared back into the trees. James hesitated briefly, debating pursuit, but Ranger's intense stance warned of potential danger. They'd discovered enough today, he wouldn't risk Grace or Rebecca. "We need to move now," he ordered sharply, guiding them quickly toward his pickup truck. Ranger followed closely, eyes never leaving the distant woods. As James drove them away from the cemetery, Grace stared thoughtfully into the side mirror, whispering quietly, "Whoever is involved will come for us next." Rebecca's voice trembled softly from the back seat. "I'm sorry I couldn't do more sooner." James met her eyes through the rearview mirror, determination firm in his voice. "You've done enough by stepping forward. Eleanor won't have died in vain. We'll uncover this." As the cemetery receded behind them, a sudden gust of wind ripped violently through the hilltop, lifting the flag from Eleanor's coffin entirely, letting it drift gently onto the damp grass. Left exposed, the coffin lid stood ominously ajar, an unsettling symbol of the truth desperately struggling to escape. The old clock on the dashboard blinked 3:15 a.m. as James Callahan guided his truck down the dark highway, headlights slicing through misty fog that enveloped the narrow roads winding out of Clearfield. Grace Miller sat beside him, wrapped tightly in her gray wool coat, her blue eyes focused nervously on the shadowy shapes slipping past the window. In the back seat, Rebecca Cole sat quietly, arms folded protectively across her slender frame, eyes darting anxiously into the darkness, still clearly shaken from earlier. Ranger, despite exhaustion, sat upright beside her, vigilant, his ears erect as he scanned the passing landscape with a quiet growl rumbling occasionally deep in his throat. Their destination lay an hour's drive north, an isolated clinic known locally as Whispering Pines Rehabilitation Center. Ranger had found something, a trail of scent too strong to ignore, leading them directly to this secluded facility. Earlier, James and Grace had tried in vain to contact Dr. Marcus Carter, the attending physician, on the night of Eleanor's supposed accident, only to discover his sudden disappearance. Dr. Carter had been described as an eccentric, withdrawn man in his late 50s, tall and gaunt with gray-streaked black hair and deep-set, haunted eyes. Staff at Ridgefield described him as aloof but meticulous, respected but distant. His abrupt absence now raised 1,000 red flags. Arriving at Whispering Pines, James slowed the truck, examining the building looming in the fog. The structure was old-fashioned, constructed of dark brick, partially covered by ivy and framed by towering pine trees that rustled quietly in the pre-dawn breeze. The silence felt oppressive, punctuated only by the soft humming of distant machinery. A single dimly lit window on the second floor hinted at life hidden within. Parking at a discreet distance, James led the small group carefully toward the rear entrance, guided by Ranger's persistent nudges. The back door, worn and marked with peeling paint, stood slightly ajar. James pushed it open cautiously, the creaking sound unnerving in the profound silence. Inside, the corridor was empty, dimly illuminated by sparse emergency lighting. The smell of antiseptic mixed sharply with something else, a faint, unsettling sweetness. Ranger immediately lowered his head, sniffing intently, pulling James insistently toward a distant door labeled simply, Records Office. James tried the handle, discovering it locked. He exchanged a quick glance with Grace, silently nodding as she removed a hairpin, quickly jimmying the simple lock. The door clicked open, revealing a cramped room filled with filing cabinets and dusty stacks of paper. Ranger immediately moved to the back corner, sniffing at a loose folder fallen behind a cabinet. Grace picked it up, scanning the contents rapidly. "James," she whispered urgently, "there's no record of Eleanor's body ever entering the morgue. Look here, bed number 217, labeled Eleanor Callahan, but marked empty." Rebecca paled, voice shaking slightly. "They must have moved her elsewhere immediately." Ranger barked suddenly, ears pricked, head turning sharply toward the hallway. Heavy footsteps echoed softly in the distance. James quickly shut the door, pulling everyone deeper inside, signaling for silence. Through a tiny crack in the doorway, James watched as a tall security guard passed slowly by. The man had a muscular build, wearing dark blue uniform, short-cropped blonde hair, and an expression of indifferent boredom as he moved on without noticing the intrusion. After the footsteps faded, James motioned the others quickly from the office, following Ranger's insistent guidance deeper into the maze of hallways. The dog's senses brought them eventually to a set of heavy double doors labeled Psychiatric Wing, Restricted Access. James felt dread clench his chest but pushed forward, determination outweighing caution. The hallways beyond were eerily silent, each room locked securely. At the far end stood room number 36, marked simply Jane Doe. Ranger pawed frantically at the door, whining softly. James, his heart racing, turned the handle, feeling relief when it unexpectedly opened, unlocked. Inside, the room was sparse and clinical, bathed in pale blue light from a night lamp. On the bed lay a woman, eyes closed, face pale and serene beneath tangled chestnut hair. James's heart stopped Eleanor. Tubes ran from an IV bag into her arm, monitors blinking quietly beside her. Approaching slowly, he whispered her name, hoping desperately for recognition. Eleanor stirred weakly, eyelids fluttering open, her gaze vacant yet searching. "James?" Her voice was barely audible, rasping painfully. He grasped her hand tightly, fighting tears. "I'm here, Eleanor. We found you." She blinked confusedly, trying desperately to focus. "I can't remember clearly. They keep giving me something." Rebecca quickly checked the IV bag, reading the label urgently. "Midazolam, strong sedative probably causing memory loss and confusion." Grace's eyes widened, voice shaking with anger. "They're deliberately keeping her sedated. They want her silenced and confused, unable to tell anyone what happened." James gently brushed hair from Eleanor's forehead. "We'll get you out of here, I promise." A quiet cough at the doorway startled them. Standing there was an elderly nurse, small and frail, in her late 60s. her silver hair pulled tightly back, blue eyes kind but wary. "You shouldn't be here. It's dangerous. They watch constantly." Grace stepped toward her softly, pleading, "Please, we're here to help her. Eleanor is my sister. Who's behind this?" The nurse hesitated, glancing nervously down the hallway before whispering urgently, "Dr. Morgan authorized this entire arrangement." Dr. Carter protested, then vanished. "No one's safe here anymore." James stood abruptly, resolve hardening. "Can you help us get Eleanor out quietly?" She nodded solemnly. "My name's Agnes. I've worked here decades. Eleanor was kind to everyone. Follow me carefully." Agnes swiftly detached the monitors, switching off alarms with practiced efficiency, carefully removing the IV from Eleanor's arm. Eleanor murmured weakly, barely conscious as James lifted her gently into his arms. As Agnes led them silently through back corridors and secret passages, Ranger stayed closely by James's side, ears alert, guiding their path instinctively. Finally reaching an emergency exit, Agnes paused briefly. "Be careful. Dr. Morgan and Harper won't let this go easily." James nodded gravely, sincere gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you, Agnes. You've done more than you can imagine." Outside, the early morning air felt refreshingly cold, the first hints of sunrise lighting the distant horizon. James placed Eleanor carefully in the back seat beside Rebecca, covering her gently with blankets. Grace turned anxiously to James, whispering softly, "What now?" James climbed into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel tightly. "Now we fight. Eleanor's alive proof their cover-up failed. We'll expose them, no matter what it takes." As they drove swiftly away from Whispering Pines, Agnes stood quietly watching their departure, her gentle face lined deeply with worry, yet tinged faintly with hope. Eleanor Callahan was no longer hidden away, silenced. The fight for truth had truly begun, with shadows no longer holding absolute power. The pale sunlight of dawn pierced gently through the half-open curtains, casting warm amber rays onto the quiet motel room on the outskirts of Clearfield. Eleanor lay on the small, neatly made bed, pale but breathing steadily. Her eyes were closed, dark lashes trembling slightly over her delicate, exhausted face. Beside the bed sat James, his tall frame slumped wearily forward, eyes shadowed from lack of sleep, his strong hands gently clasping Eleanor's slender fingers. Ranger lay quietly at James's feet, his sable fur silvered with age and injury, ears flicking occasionally, sensing an unease even in sleep. Grace sat nearby, laptop open, fingers swiftly tapping across the keys. Her striking red hair was pulled hastily into a messy ponytail, blue eyes sharp with determination. Since their narrow escape from Whispering Pines, Grace had tirelessly pursued digital leads, navigating hospital servers and databases meticulously. Rebecca, seated across from her, sipped coffee silently, her delicate features tense with anxiety. Suddenly, Ranger raised his head sharply, nostrils flaring. With difficulty he rose, whining softly and approaching Eleanor's bedside. His old bones and injured legs slowed his movements, but the urgency radiating from him was unmistakable. He placed his paws on the bed, sniffing carefully at Eleanor's arm. With a sudden surge of energy, Ranger began barking loudly, his deep voice echoing powerfully through the small room. "Ranger!" James stood abruptly, startled by the dog's outburst. Yet before he could quiet the old companion, Eleanor's eyes fluttered open, blinking weakly but rapidly gaining clarity. Ranger ceased barking immediately, giving a gentle whine of reassurance, laying his muzzle carefully upon her chest. "James?" Eleanor's voice came soft, cracked but unmistakably clear. "Where am I?" James knelt swiftly beside her, relief and love flooding his tired features. "Safe now. We got you out." Eleanor gazed around, confusion fading slowly from her gentle hazel eyes. "I remember the hospital. Something awful. They wanted me silenced." James held her hand tightly, voice firm and protective. "We know. We're going to stop them. I promise." Meanwhile, Grace drew in a sharp breath, excitement and fear mingling. "James? Rebecca, come see this." She turned her laptop toward them, screen displaying an official-looking document. "I accessed hospital records through Dr. Morgan's assistant's account. There's Eleanor's falsified death certificate. Look at the signatures. Dr. Morgan and someone named George Hammond from the Military Insurance Division." James clenched his jaw, fists tightening. I know Hammond. He's based at my military headquarters. This goes deeper than we thought. Rebecca paled visibly, trembling slightly. Hammond visited Ridgefield Hospital multiple times. He was the liaison approving financial transfers. If Eleanor exposed their embezzlement, Hammond would have everything to lose. Grace quickly transferred copies to a portable drive, glancing nervously toward the door. This evidence is critical, but we're running out of time. They'll come looking for Eleanor once they realize she's gone. Eleanor struggled to sit up, gripping James's arm tightly. We have to confront them, especially Dr. Morgan. He manipulated everything. James hesitated, protective instincts warring with determination. Eleanor's gentle but resolute expression made the decision clear. They would face this storm together. Within the hour, James stood outside Ridgefield Hospital's main entrance. The sleek glass facade, usually welcoming, now felt ominous. He strode directly toward the administrative offices, shoulders squared with a soldier's determination, Grace and Rebecca trailing behind, Ranger at his side, limping but steady. Dr. Anthony Morgan awaited them in his spacious, well-appointed office. He was a robust man, mid-50s, broad-shouldered, with meticulously combed dark hair showing touches of gray at the temples. His deep-set eyes, cold and calculating, narrowed slightly as James entered. Beside Morgan stood George Hammond, tall and stern, dressed impeccably in a tailored dark suit, his neatly trimmed silver beard lending authority to his cold expression. Captain Callahan, Morgan greeted icily, a false politeness barely masking irritation. This is unexpected. Officially, your wife— Save your lies, James snapped sharply, voice edged with barely restrained fury. We know everything. The falsified death certificate, the forged signatures. Eleanor's alive. Your cover-up failed. Morgan's eyes flickered momentarily with shock, but quickly regained composure. You're mistaken. Clearly traumatized, Ranger barked fiercely, interrupting Morgan. The old dog, despite pain and weariness, stood defiantly, growling deeply at the director. You thought you could manipulate hospital funds and military insurance by declaring Eleanor dead, didn't you? Grace accused angrily, voice trembling but steady. George Hammond's face flushed briefly with anger. Careful, Miss Miller. Accusations without proof. Grace immediately thrust the portable drive forward, eyes blazing. This contains every record, every falsified document. We have proof. Morgan stepped forward aggressively, his mask slipping, revealing a calculating ruthlessness. You can't possibly win against us. We have influence you don't understand. Eleanor, pale but resolute, stepped carefully into the room, supported gently by Rebecca, her quiet presence stunning everyone. Her voice came soft but firm, carrying authority. Influence won't protect you anymore. The truth is out. You failed. Morgan staggered back slightly, eyes wide in disbelief, Hammond visibly shaken. Eleanor's unexpected appearance was undeniable evidence of their deception. Suddenly, Ranger barked sharply, his ears perking toward the door. Several police officers appeared, led by Sheriff Douglas Bennett, a solidly built man in his late 40s, with close-cropped brown hair beneath his sheriff's hat, calm brown eyes revealing determination. Dr. Morgan, Mr. Hammond, you're both under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and attempted murder. Bennett nodded respectfully toward James. We received the documents Miss Miller provided. It's solid evidence. Morgan's jaw tightened furiously. Hammond's shoulders sagged in defeat. As officers escorted the two away, James moved to Eleanor's side, pulling her gently into his embrace. Ranger lay quietly at their feet, relieved, eyes slowly closing, finally allowing exhaustion to take him. Sheriff Bennett approached quietly, voice gentle but firm. Captain Callahan, Eleanor justice takes time, but today we moved closer. You're both safe now. Eleanor nodded gratefully, leaning wearily against James. Her eyes found Ranger, gratitude and affection filling her soft gaze. We owe everything to Ranger. He brought me back. James stroked Ranger's fur softly, the dog's breathing steady and peaceful now. He always finds the truth, James whispered, pride shining clearly. Always. As the sun rose higher, warming Ridgefield's hallways with golden sunlight, Eleanor rested her head against James's shoulder, eyes closed peacefully, knowing the fight was nearly over. The shadows had begun to retreat at last. Warm sunlight spilled gently through the wide windows of Eleanor's hospital room, painting the walls in soft gold as spring finally asserted itself over Clearfield. After several long, uncertain days of recovery, Eleanor Callahan opened her eyes to full clarity, her vision unmarred by shadows. Her hazel eyes, though weary, were steady and calm, reflecting the determination that had always defined her character. The delicate color had returned to her cheeks, and her chestnut hair, brushed softly to frame her gentle face, shimmered warmly under the sunlight. James Callahan sat beside her, his rugged face softened by relief, the heavy lines around his deep brown eyes finally relaxing into quiet joy. At the foot of Eleanor's hospital bed, Ranger lay peacefully. The old German shepherd, his sable fur now prominently silvered by age and hardship, lifted his head slightly, eyes meeting Eleanor's in quiet understanding. He'd barely moved from her bedside since their return, faithfully watching over her even through his own fatigue. Today, Ranger rose carefully, limping only slightly, and settled himself next to Eleanor's feet, closing his amber eyes in profound relief. His duty fulfilled, Ranger allowed himself to rest, breathing deeply and calmly for the first time in days. Grace Miller stood at the window, her slim frame silhouetted against the bright morning. Her fiery red hair, glowing under the sunlight, was neatly tied back, highlighting her determined expression. Her phone buzzed incessantly, a testament to the explosive impact her investigative series, Hospital of Death, had sparked nationwide. Grace's courageous reporting, revealing the elaborate scheme orchestrated by Dr. Morgan and George Hammond, was resonating deeply. The scandal she uncovered had forced sweeping changes in military medical oversight and civilian hospital administration. Grace had become a reluctant celebrity overnight, though her only concern remained the safety and happiness of her sister. As Eleanor reached out, grasping James's strong, reassuring hand, she offered a tired but genuine smile. "You saved me," she whispered softly, gratitude and warmth shining clearly from her eyes. James shook his head gently, his expression humble. "Ranger saved us both," he answered, softly stroking the dog's fur. Ranger stirred slightly under his touch, letting out a contented sigh. Over the following weeks, Clearfield slowly reclaimed normalcy. Dr. Morgan and George Hammond, their reputations irrevocably tarnished, faced swift justice. Sheriff Douglas Bennett diligently coordinated the arrests and subsequent investigations, earning praise and renewed respect from the local community. Bennett, with his short-cropped brown hair and calm, authoritative demeanor, maintained a steady presence throughout the proceedings, ensuring transparency and accountability. The national attention brought unprecedented support for Eleanor's recovery. Letters and flowers flooded her room, each a small testament to the countless lives she'd impacted. Eleanor grew stronger daily, buoyed by the compassion surrounding her. James remained by her side constantly, determinedly supportive. Finally convinced by Eleanor's strength, James made a quiet but profound decision. He officially resigned from active military service. His entire focus shifted to ensuring Eleanor's health and safety, as well as addressing a new cause dear to both their hearts. James, with Grace's assistance, purchased an expansive piece of land just outside Clearfield, transforming it into the Callahan Rehabilitation and Recovery Center. The center, an ambitious and heartfelt project, would become a sanctuary dedicated to assisting retired and injured military personnel, as well as canine veterans who had given everything for their human partners. Eleanor, now fully healed and vibrant, threw herself wholeheartedly into its planning, bringing her gentle compassion and medical expertise to the forefront of their work. The day the center officially opened, hundreds of supporters gathered beneath a sprawling banner bearing the stars and stripes. Rows of flags rippled gracefully in the gentle breeze, their colors vibrant beneath a clear, endless blue sky. The crowd included veterans, active service members, their families, and townspeople whose lives had been touched by the Callahans' courage. Standing quietly beside Eleanor, dressed comfortably in casual attire that matched the simplicity and warmth of the ceremony, James surveyed the gathering with pride and humility. Eleanor squeezed his hand gently, whispering softly, "This is beautiful. Thank you for bringing me home." James smiled warmly. "This is your doing, Eleanor. Your courage brought us here." Nearby, Grace finished preparations at the speaker's podium. Her red hair shone brightly, and a gentle smile crossed her face as she surveyed the expectant audience. She stepped forward, voice clear and confident, welcoming everyone and briefly recounting the harrowing events that brought them all here. "Today," Grace said firmly, her blue eyes bright with emotion, "we gather not only to celebrate recovery, but to honor those who fought tirelessly for truth, most notably one remarkable hero who never wavered in loyalty." She glanced toward James and Eleanor, signaling softly. James knelt beside Ranger, stroking his fur gently. "Your turn, old friend," he whispered affectionately. Ranger rose slowly, his aged bones moving with dignified grace. The crowd hushed respectfully as the German shepherd limped carefully up the steps to the podium, his presence commanding despite his quiet humility. He paused there, lifting his amber eyes toward the gathered audience, gaze calm yet powerful. In the front row, Eleanor watched with pride and deep affection, her gentle face alight with love and gratitude. Ranger's eyes met hers briefly, their silent exchange speaking louder than words ever could. In that profound silence, Ranger lifted his muzzle skyward and barked once clear, unwavering, resonant. It was a single sound, yet it encapsulated everything: courage, truth, resilience. As his voice faded gently into the morning air, applause erupted throughout the crowd, filling the air with joyous celebration. James embraced Eleanor warmly, their shared relief and joy evident. Grace smiled softly, stepping back discreetly, allowing the couple their well-deserved peace. High above, the American flags danced gracefully, sunlight illuminating their vibrant colors. No longer were there shadows of sorrow or deceit. Beneath these flags, there were no more coffins, only life, hope, and renewal. Ranger returned slowly to Eleanor's side, gently laying his head upon her knee. Eleanor rested her hand softly upon his head, whispering quiet gratitude to the dog who had defied all odds, carrying them through darkness into clarity and redemption. As the celebration continued around them, James wrapped an arm protectively around Eleanor's shoulders, knowing their journey had transformed them forever. The road had been treacherous, yet their bond emerged stronger, reinforced by courage, faith, and unyielding love. Nearby, Sheriff Bennett watched quietly, pride evident in his calm expression. Rebecca Cole stood beside him, her delicate features relaxed at last, no longer shadowed by fear. Even Agnes, the elderly nurse from Whispering Pines, attended quietly in the background, her frail figure carrying quiet strength as she watched the new beginning unfolding before them. When the ceremony finally concluded and the crowd dispersed, Eleanor, James, Grace, and Ranger stood quietly together, sharing a private, silent moment beneath the gently waving flags. "We made it," Eleanor said softly, her voice carrying quiet strength. James nodded solemnly, gently touching Ranger's fur. "Thanks to this hero." Grace smiled warmly. "A hero who showed us the way home." Together, beneath the bright sunlight and vibrant flags of renewal, they stood united, stronger and more resilient, their lives forever changed by the power of truth and the courage of an aging, loyal canine companion named Ranger. This story reminds us that truth, courage, and loyalty will always prevail over darkness and deceit. Just like Ranger, the brave canine, we each have a purpose to stand up for those we love, to defend the truth, and to remain faithful even in the toughest times. Every day, you and I may face our own battles, quiet struggles, or difficult choices. Remember Eleanor and James. They overcame seemingly impossible odds because they had faith, loyalty, and the courage to do what was right. Perhaps we can each learn to do the same. If this story touched your heart, please consider sharing it with someone who might find strength in it today. Don't forget to leave a comment below with the word Amen if you believe in the power of truth, love, and loyalty. Subscribe to our channel for more uplifting stories like this one. May God bless you, protect you, and guide you on your own journey. Amen.